Michael Wayne Ryan was an American murderer, white supremacist, anti-Semite and cult leader who during the 1980s led a group of Christian extremists who were based on a farm just outside the tiny village of Rouleau in Nebraska, where they gathered weapons for an impending race war that Ryan had been told, apparently by God, would soon herald the end of the world. Within their compound, Ryan referred to himself as a king and the embodiment of the Archangel Michael. However, the reality was that Michael Ryan was a psychopathic sexual sadist who used his position to direct horrific acts of violence and sexual abuse, including fathers being forced to engage in sex acts with their young sons, and vice versa. This horrific environment eventually led to the murder of two people, a little boy called Luke Stice, who was only 5 years old, and a 26-year-old man called James Tim. The death of James was particularly horrific, with him being tortured over the space of 3 days, including being sexually abused by having objects, including the handle of the shovel, rammed into his anus, and having his skin cut with a razor and pulled off with pliers before being brutally murdered. This case is one of the worst I've ever come across, and makes you question how deep and dark the depths of depravity people are capable of really go. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Nebraska is a state in the American Midwest, part of the Corn Belt, which also includes Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas and Missouri. These are all states that are dominated by farming and agriculture. Nebraska is a place with areas of amazing natural beauty. It's also a state which is sparsely populated, with many villages and towns having fewer than 3,000 people. It's an area where people can settle and enjoy a quiet rural life, but it's also a state where dangerous people could operate undetected. One of these people was Michael Wayne Ryan, who was born on August 3rd, 1948, in Kansas. His place of birth was likely the city of Antony, a city approximately 55 miles southwest of Wichita, as this is where he grew up and went to school. He was the eldest of 5 children to a woman called Elsie and a man named Gene, but the household was abusive, with the pair frequently arguing and Gene beating his wife, all while the children watched. Ryan didn't do very well in school, but I've read differing accounts as to why. Some sources say this was due to his low intelligence, but others state he was actually of average or even above average intelligence, but just couldn't be bothered to apply himself. Regardless, he didn't graduate from high school. However, Ryan did not seem bothered by this. He'd always decided on a career path for himself. For years he'd had dreams of being in the military, but not just a regular soldier serving his country. No, he wanted to be a decorated officer, and when he was around 17 or 18 years old, he applied to join the US Army. He got as far as the Army physical, but was rejected on medical grounds. It appears this was due to Ryan having an undescended testicle, which meant that it hadn't dropped down from his abdomen into the scrotal sac during his childhood. Rejection from the Army was a major turning point for Ryan. He became extremely angry. This was, in large part, due to his childhood dreams being crushed, but, as he'll get into later, he was a man who didn't take rejection well. No was not a word he understood. Around this time, Michael Ryan met a girl called Ruth, who was still in high school. Towards Ruth, Ryan would show his ability to manipulate and charm people. She was underage and her parents didn't approve of the relationship and tried to forbid the pair from seeing each other. But Ryan would repeatedly tell Ruth how special she was, how much he loved her, and how he couldn't imagine his life without her, driving a wedge between her and her parents, to the point where, when she was just 16 years old, she ran away with Ryan and was missing for 6 months before being located by the police and returned home. From what I've read, Ruth had moved to the city of Antony not long before her relationship began with Ryan, and, being new to the area, she didn't have many friends and became reliant on Ryan for companionship. Whether he targeted her because he felt she was lonely is unclear, but likely, he was a predator who could sense vulnerability. When Ruth was just 17 years old, the pair got married. She remained with Ryan until his eventual arrest in 1985. So the relationship lasted over 20 years. I use the term relationship loosely, as this implies an equal partnership between two people, and this was anything but. Behind closed doors, Michael Ryan was a monster. He would frequently beat Ruth, including strangling her, until she passed out, with him expecting her to comply with all of his demands, without question, and this included satisfying his sexual appetites. Ruth was raped repeatedly over the years of the marriage. There was no ambiguity in terms of her lack of consent, as she would often cry and scream whilst Ryan forced himself on her He knew she didn't consent. He simply did not care. Given what happened next, he also likely got off on the pain and terror he caused his wife during these acts of sickening sexual violence. The marriage produced 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The youngest child was named Mary, the middle child was called Alvin, and the eldest child was called Dennis. Dennis is a key figure in the later crimes committed by his father, so he'll be the only one of the 3 children that I'll focus on. All of them, though, will frequently witness their father beating their mother, but it appears that Dennis, out of the 3 children, would soon join his mother as a target to his father's violent abuse. Any infraction of any rule would result in a beating. Dennis idolized his father, but just wanted his love and attention, and believed as the years progressed, he was at fault. He deserved the beatings. He looked for any way to please his father, which would lead to his involvement in horrific crimes when he was still a child himself. Like most domestic abusers, Michael Ryan was a hypocritical tyrant. He expected his rules to be followed, but believed he should be allowed to do anything he wanted. He was frequently unfaithful and would make no efforts to hide his behaviour. He would try to get Ruth to arrange sexual encounters with her few female friends, and would often make crass comments about wishing to sleep with them around the dinner table. On some occasions, Ruth would actually find women's underwear and clothing in the home, evidence of the affairs, and when she confronted her husband, he would just shrug his shoulders, or, more often than not, beat her for daring to question him. However, with regards to Ruth, he made it clear that if she cheated on him or left him, he would hunt her down and kill her. Ryan repeatedly accused her of affairs she wasn't having, whilst he was constantly sleeping with other women throughout their marriage. Over the years, Ruth was ground down, and she simply accepted her situation, being too exhausted and afraid to be able to do anything about it, so she suffered beatings and rapes for years. This is why, in around 1979 or 1980, when Ryan suggested that Ruth ask a friend of hers, called Janet, to have a threesome with them, she complied. Janet also said yes, but this was not a one-off event. The 3 of them lived together, with Ryan essentially being in a relationship with 2 women at the same time. Again, there are indicators of Ryan's predatory behaviour, his ability to sense weakness and exploit it. Janet was a woman struggling to raise 3 children in the aftermath of a difficult and drawn-out divorce. He knew she was vulnerable. Eventually, Ruth, Ryan, and their 3 children moved in with Janet and her 3 children, and Janet would soon regret agreeing to be any part of the relationship between Ruth and Ryan. As with Ruth, Ryan began looking to control Janet and expected his rules to be followed. On one occasion, he demanded that Janet spend the day in bed with him. When she refused, he beat her mercilessly, including strangling her. Due to this, it appears that Janet was able to get the family to leave, but they only moved a short distance away and rented a home down the street, and the families continued to hang out as the children were friends. On one occasion, Janet and the children were invited over for dinner, and without warning, she went to leave. Ryan ran full pelt at her, and in front of both his and her children, grabbed Janet and dragged her into a room, and then began punching her repeatedly in the face. He then stopped, went to get a towel to give to Janet to clear out the blood, left, but then returned again and began to viciously attack Janet for a second time, for absolutely no reason. This time, he began to strangle her. The police were called, but it appears nothing came of this. Why is unclear. Janet severed ties with the family. After this, the family moved to a dilapidated farmhouse in the city of Whiting in Kansas, with Ruth and the children expected to renovate and make the property habitable. When they didn't meet his standards, Ryan would beat them all. The family constantly had money troubles, and this was due to Ryan's inability to keep a job. He had no trouble getting jobs. He was charming and could talk his way into most positions, mainly in construction. But as soon as he gained employment, there would always be a problem, mainly related to his bosses. They, according to him, would bully and harass him, ignoring the fact that he was lazy, work shy, and would often steal from the companies he worked for. No, it was everyone else's fault when he lost the jobs. Eventually, in his late 20s, Michael Ryan did obtain a job he stuck at until the early 1980s, with him working as a truck driver. He enjoyed the freedom this gave him. He would crisscross the Midwest making deliveries. No oversight, no boss. It was these trips away that would be the only respite for the family. Despite working long hours, The family continued to not have any money, which makes me question what Ryan was doing on the road. He was a man who liked to abuse others and was a sexual sadist. Can I believe that he didn't use the solitary nature of his job to indulge his vices? I would suspect a lot of his money went on prostitutes. That's assuming he even paid them for their services, and did not just rape them. However, regardless, everything was someone else's fault. Michael Ryan was master and king in his own domain, a man who was never at fault, who should be allowed to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. If anyone defied him, they would be mercilessly abused. He was a monster, a narcissist, and almost inevitably a psychopath, who had a talent to charm and manipulate people, all in order to exploit them to get his own way, with him having no remorse for his actions. In the late 1970s, whilst living in Whiting, Kansas, Michael Ryan was introduced by his brother-in-law to the teachings of James Wickstrom, a horrific, vile excuse for a man, a hate preacher who trawled the Midwest in both the 1970s and 1980s, looking for disenfranchised and angry people to join his racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic cult. Ryan began to attend lectures given by Wickstrom, and it was this meeting of two evil minds which would start a chain reaction, leading to the horrific crimes which occurred in the tiny village of Rouleau in Nebraska just a few years later. James Wickstrom, who thankfully is no longer amongst the living, was a hate-filled piece of shit who between the 1970s and when he finally shuffled off this mortal coil in March 2018, went around the US delivering unhinged, violent, homophobic, anti-Semitic and racist sermons, calling for, in particular, the extermination of the Jews. In an interview in 2004, he said that people, after beating Jews to death, should, quote, throw them in the wood chipper, and then, from the wood chipper, let the remains go into a big incendiary truck, which is right behind the wood chipper, and give them the Holocaust they rightly deserve. Also in 2003, at a white supremacist gathering, he stated, quote, I have a dream that in the days to come, there won't be anyone who isn't white that's gonna be in America. Wickstrom was a follower of a theory known as Christian identity, which is an interpretation of Christianity, which promotes the idea that white people are the true chosen people, and that all non-whites will be killed or enslaved, and that the white race would inherit a heavenly kingdom on earth under the rule of Jesus Christ. This delusional part of belief, stems from an interpretation of passages in the Old Testament, which begins with Adam and Eve apparently having sex with a snake, and then it goes all on from there. Seriously, if you want to know more, look it up. It's completely off the deep end. Things like this make my blood boil and hurt my head. So let's start with the obvious. Jesus Christ wasn't, if he ever existed, white. He was born in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, not Jersey. Also, the Garden of Eden, if such a place ever existed, was likely in modern-day Iraq. So Adam and Eve too, newsflash, not white. Pretty much every main character in the Bible was not white. Oh, and here's the absolute kicker. Jesus Christ was a Jew, shock horror. So how you get from that to what old fucknut here is banging on about is beyond me. I can't blame religion entirely. Ultimately, things like this are because of what we as human beings are like. Or as French philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, quote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. So basically, unless we all sit quietly on our own, we as a race always find ways to divide ourselves and find reasons to demonize other people. If it wasn't using religion to do this, we'd find something else. If you literally got rid of everything that divides us currently, and let's say gave half the people in the world blue hats and the other half red hats, we'd eventually start bickering about that, dividing ourselves, and potentially starting wars about who had the best hats. Sorry, that was a huge aside, but I do find it fascinating how individually people can be so kind and caring, but as a species, the human race is cruel and self-destructive. Anyway, if you think the mental gymnastics used to justify James Wickstrom's ramblings are ridiculous, trust me, you haven't heard anything yet. So Wickstrom was one of the founder members of the Posse Comitatus, a group which, as well as being racist and anti-Semitic, was also anti-government and anti-tax, with them citing the latter as being unconstitutional. So you're anti-government, or when it suits you, you cite the Constitution. Good on hypocrisy. In the 1970s and 80s, A combination of factors resulted in a period where farmers across the Corn Belt could no longer stay in business. This included a downturn in the economy, the foreign market drying up, and this resulted in many farmers taking on more debt to stay afloat, and then being unable to pay back these loans to the bank. This resulted in many hard-working Americans losing their farms. Wickstrom took full advantage of this and would travel throughout the Midwest, spewing his hatred, giving some of these people a focus for their desperation and someone to blame, whether this was the faceless governments or the Jews, the blacks, the gays, etc. All Wickstrom needed was an in, a subject these people felt aggrieved about. He could then spread his poison to other aspects of their lives. So your farm has been taken. Blame the Jews. Can't get another job? Clearly that's because the immigrants have taken them all. He then twisted this to saying, actually, you know what? You are the chosen people. So you go from being in a desperate state, in complete despair, and someone comes along and tells you, actually, you're a soldier of God. Although he referred to God as Yahweh, which was the name which God himself is apparently meant to have called himself in the book of Exodus, whilst communicating with Moses. It's easy to see why this is an intoxicating idea, why it might be drawn into the web of someone who makes these sort of comments. Just to add a bit of gravitas, it doesn't hurt if you give yourself various titles, like calling yourself Doctor, as Wickstrom did, despite never earning that right. It just helps with the whole, I am better than you should do what I say angle. Add to this, the key element of this person claims to be in direct contact with God. You have yourselves the building blocks of a religious cult. Specifically, James Wickstrom pretended to give his followers answers and comfort in times of trouble, as well as giving them a focus with their frustration and hate, and creating a them versus us situation by making them fear of the government and what specific types of people would, if it was not for his guidance, wisdom and protection, destroy them. This was all possible because he had the backing of God, so all of his commands had to be followed without question. By making the outside world seem hostile, the member turns inward. They begin to see the cult lead as the only source of truth, their only salvation. These are what I'll call, for want of a better term, the traits of the followers. People led to believe, often due to desperation, that they are now empowered. The whole point of a cult is to strip them of their identity, essentially making them drones to be used and controlled. However, the leaders are different. They're often psychopathic, extremely narcissistic, sadistic, and motivated by power and control. Whether the leaders actually believe what they spout is, to some extent, inconsequential. The important thing is their followers do, and they're brainwashed enough that mention of the name of the Almighty would enable them to direct their followers to get whatever they want and do whatever they want without question, which, as we'll get into, can involve some of the most horrific acts of violence you could ever imagine. Michael Rahn began as the follower and would spend hours going through his own Bible with his wife Ruth, reinterpreting passages to fit his twisted worldview, which aligned with that of Wickstrom, that everyone else was to blame for all of his issues, and that, as a white man, he was superior to every other race. These beliefs no doubt compounded his already narcissistic view, which was shown by his abusive behaviour, especially towards his wife. However, Michael Rahn was a man driven by control. He wanted to exploit others, have them do whatever he commanded, and I've no doubt that Wickstrom's hate-filled lectures, he looked around him and saw people fawning over him, worshipping him as some sort of god, and he wanted this. No doubt he began taking mental notes of how to manipulate people, refining his already pre-existing propensity to act in this way, with the hope that he too could become a leader, a person in a position of absolute power and control over people he could use and abuse at will. Soon, Michael Rahn began running his own Bible study groups in his home, injecting his poison into the minds of others that were all followers of James Wickstrom. Rahn was a master manipulator, as well as being charismatic, and he developed a small following of his own. During these meetings, Rahn would say that any Bible verse which didn't conform to his deranged beliefs, quote, the Jews added. Evil recognizes evil, and Rahn quickly came to the attention of Wickstrom and had at least one private meeting with him. He saw Rahn's potential and began to groom him to be his representative in Kansas and Nebraska. Wickstrom taught Rahn something which is integral to what happened next, and is evidence of the truly unhinged nature of cults. Specifically, Wickstrom taught Rahn the quote, arm test, which involved one group member holding out their right arm, a second group member would then place one hand on the wrist of the first group member's extended arm and one hand on their right shoulder. The second member would then apply downward pressure to the arm and would ask a question of Yahweh. If the answer was yes, then the arm would drop. If it was a no, then the arm would stay extended. Here is a very short clip of Ruth and Dennis describing this test.
One person would hold out their right arm.
Put your arm out like that, and then the other person would ask a question.
And they push down on it. If your arm stayed up, then it was yes. If your arm fell, then it was no.
And honest, you had no control over it.
Absolute lunacy. So essentially this arm test could clearly be rigged to get the outcome you wanted.
So you could have a group member who you know to have low physical strength with their arm out, and a strong member pushing down their arm in order to ensure the arm dropped. And so the answer was yes, and then vice versa to ensure the opposite outcome. However, Michael Ryan wanted to be a leader in his own right, not simply Wickstrom's second in command. He was running his Bible study groups and himself was developing a small following of his own. And he began to put into motion forming his own cult, which would eventually result in him, along with around 25 others, including children, moving to an 80-acre farm just outside the tiny village of Rouleau in Nebraska in 1984. Breaking here, I need to outline the finer important elements of a cult. Firstly, it's common for cults to set up communities or compounds where the members can be more effectively cut off from the outside world, including their own families. In these environments, every element of their lives can be observed and manipulated. Again, there's an illusion of freedom and empowerment when the exact opposite is true. These places are essentially prisons. Escape is extremely unlikely, often impossible. These sites are behind closed doors and sometimes televised for the eyes of the whole world to see. Places of abuse, violence, murder and death, where dissent is punished without mercy. With Jim Jones, he set up the People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known by the informal name, quote, Jonestown, a remote settlement in Guyana, where eventually 918 people, including 276 children, would die in a mass suicide / mass murder directed by Jones. With David Koresh, he set up a compound for his Branch Davidian cult in the Mount Carmel Center, a set of buildings around 20 miles outside of Waco in Texas, where in April 1993, 82 people, including 28 children, would die. Secondly is the stockpiling of firearms, often procured illegally either through theft of the weapons themselves or more often bought using the proceeds of crime committed by the followers, often thefts, burglaries, etc. The cult leader will often state that these are being procured in readiness for the impending holy war or when the government attacks. However, the reality is these weapons are used by trusted members of the cult to wield power over the followers in order to keep them in line. And when the government comes calling, to arm these followers and send them out like cannon fodder, essentially creating a human shield so that dear leader can maintain their position. If they're going to lose this, and potentially their life, then they will demonstrate their power one last time by taking everyone else with them. The horror of religious cults cannot be understated, and the one established by Michael Ryan, whilst nowhere near the scale of those created by Jim Jones or David Koresh, was no less horrifying. The farm in Rouleau would be the scene of truly depraved and sickening crimes that are almost beyond belief. Whilst Michael Ryan and his followers moved to the farm in Rouleau in 1984, this was simply the location where he solidified his hold over them. By the point of this move, the cult was already well established. In 1983, during the Bible study groups that Ryan ran, it was determined, through use of the arm test, that he possessed the spirit of the Archangel Michael, who was depicted in the Bible as one of the lead angels, the protector of man. Also, the arm test apparently proved that Ryan was in direct contact with Yahweh. With these quote-unquote facts determined, Ryan quickly began to exert his control over the group to get what he wanted. This included procuring women to sexually exploit. One of the women, known as Cheryl, was married, but Ryan told her that Yahweh had told him that she needed to leave her husband, who was, quote, on Satan's side. Using the arm test, it was apparently proven that Cheryl was not in fact married to her husband, and so, despite still being married to his long-suffering wife Ruth, Ryan took another wife, with the clearly unofficial ceremony being conducted by another cult member. Ryan would eventually marry at least 3 women in this manner, including Cheryl's mother. No doubt this was simply to have as many women as possible to have sex with. Sometime in 1983, Ryan began calling the cult members with, quote, orders from headquarters, with him telling them that Yahweh had told him that they needed to go out and steal. If there was any reluctance, then Ryan would tell them their families would be at risk because they would be angering God. These crimes were intended to establish a, quote, base camp, with the money from the items they stole being used to buy food, generators, fuel, clothing, weapons and ammunition. These crimes occurred in Kansas, Missouri and Nebraska, and mainly involved the stealing of cattle, hogs, and various large items of farm machinery and construction equipment. So remember, this is a time where farmers were struggling to put food on their table, and Ryan was directing the theft of the very things they depended on, whilst recruiting his members from this same group. However, Ryan told his followers the people they stole from were in league with Satan, and therefore they didn't own this property, and it should belong to the followers of Yahweh. These were not just petty and infrequent crimes. By the point of the downfall of the cult in 1985, they were found to be in possession of stolen goods, valued in excess of $120,000. No doubt much of the money went straight into Michael Ryan's pocket, so he could fund a luxurious lifestyle, no doubt because God had told him this was his will. In order to outline what happened next, I need to go through some of the members of Ryan's cult. Around 15 adults and 10 children moved to the property in Rouleau, but I want to focus on 4 adults, as well as 1 innocent child. Firstly is Aura Richard Stice, known as Rick, who was the owner of the farm in Rouleau the cult moved to. It was an 80-acre pig farm, and, like other farmers, he was struggling to manage financially. He'd also lost his wife Sandra in 1983, and so was also grieving whilst trying to raise his 3 young children. Rick, in his desperation, was seeking comfort and answers, and sometime in 1983, he was introduced to Michael Ryan, and began to attend his Bible study groups, with some of these appearing to also be held at the farm. One of Rick's children was Luke Brandon Stice, born on the 10th of October 1979. He would be one of the murder victims of the cult, and would not live past the age of 5 years old. James Allen Tim, the second eventual murder victim of the cult, was born on the 10th of July 1959 in the city of Beatrice in Nebraska. Soon after his birth, his mother became ill and passed away a few years later, leading to him being raised by foster parents, although it does appear he had some contact with his biological father during his childhood. James's foster parents were Mennonites, which is part of the Protestant faith, with their beliefs including, amongst others, charity to others, pacifism, foot washing, church discipline, and separation from the world. They live in similar conditions to those of the Amish faith, but I believe that Mennonites, as opposed to the Amish, have embraced some modern technologies. Regardless, the tenets of the faith that James was raised in are at odds with the hate spewed by Michael Ryan. But despite my best efforts, I've been unable to identify how James became involved with Ryan's cult and why he adopted his belief system. Losing a parent at a young age can have a devastating effect on a child. Possibly James was looking for peace and some answers, but was not finding this through his current faith, and so fell into the clutches of Michael Ryan. However, it seems that James was not a true believer and began to see the horror of the group and wished to leave. This is likely the reason that he would be horrifically tortured and murdered in 1985. James Haverkamp, known as Jimmy, was born around 1959 and raised devout Catholic. But in his early 20s, he was suffering financial hardship, so began attending the meetings of James Wickstrom, where he met Michael Ryan, him then attending his Bible study groups. It appears that he was particularly susceptible to the influence of Ryan, and was the instigator of many of the thefts used to fund the establishment and running of the compound in Rouleau. Jimmy was utterly devoted to the teachings of Ryan and would do whatever he said. He would subsequently indoctrinate his family, with his mother, father, 3 sisters and his younger brother, all eventually moving to the compound. They were also eventually joined by Jimmy's cousin, Timothy Haverkamp, who was born around 1961 or 1962, and who had been indoctrinated to consider Michael Ryan as some sort of divine prophet. Lastly is John David Andreas, born around 1955. He was a friend of James Timms, and it appears they met through the Bible groups run by Michael Ryan, and in fact, they accompanied each other when they moved to the Rouleau farm. However, Andreas would be a central figure in the eventual torture and murder of his so-called friend. No doubt Michael Ryan saw the advantage of the Rouleau farm. It was a place where he could wield ultimate control over his followers, and the isolated location would make escape extremely difficult, even impossible. He convinced Rick Stice to allow the followers to move to this location, stating the protection of the cult would mean he could keep hold of the farm, as he would have the support of his brothers and sisters. This would mean he could also raise his children. Between June and August 1984, the cult members moved onto the property, with Ryan taking his wife Ruth and his 3 children with him. As soon as the compound was established, Michael Ryan ramped up his tactics in order to completely dominate and isolate his followers, whilst directing them to mercilessly crush any challenge to his authority. As a starting point, Ryan sought to ensure that escape from the compound was almost impossible. The children were pulled out of school and educated on site. Decisions about who could leave the compound was determined using the arm test, which, as already stated, was something that Ryan could easily rig. The test was used to make all major decisions, but the followers were forbidden from using this without the direct authorization and oversight of Ryan. No doubt that he could choose who was involved in order to ensure the answer, apart from God, that he wanted. Michael Ryan, as well as being the incarnation of the Archangel Michael, gave himself other titles, including King and General, no doubt in order to ensure that his superiority over his followers was further reinforced. As I've stated repeatedly, cults are based on falsehoods, illusions of freedom, which are built on a foundation of lies, to strip the power away from those who have fallen into this dangerous web. At one point, Ryan did give his followers the option of leaving, but he said if they did, they would, quote, burn in hell. If the group member elected to stay, then they had to remain in the cult forever. If they tried to leave after that point, Ryan would personally hunt them down and murder them. Not much of a choice, is it? By the end of August 1984, the daily routine had been established within the compound. In the mornings, the women would consult with Yahweh, using the arm test, to determine what meals and chores they needed to complete. Ryan would then use the arm test to determine which group members needed to fast or do some penance for the day for infractions which had apparently angered God. He would also tell the group about visions he'd had, often reinforcing to them that they needed to prepare for the Battle of Armageddon, which would apparently occur in Rouleau. But due to this, they needed an arsenal of weapons. Eventually, the group would acquire 75,000 rounds of ammunition and dozens of weapons, including pistols and a cache of automatic rifles. Whilst others were toiling away, Ryan would spend his days watching television, which others were banned from doing, having sex with the women in the compound, and smoking cannabis. In the evenings, he would direct group members to go out on stealing raids. He'd never go out on these himself, obviously, to ensure that if they were caught, he would not suffer any consequences. Michael Ryan assigned military ranks to the men in the cult, and if they pleased him, they'd be promoted. If they did anything which he deemed unacceptable, God deemed unacceptable, they'd be demoted. Many of the men, through their devotion to Ryan, became generals. Top of this pile was Rick Stice, who attained the completely made-up rank of 6-star general. Michael Ryan never showed any interest in his children throughout their lives, but upon moving to the compound, he began to groom and manipulate his eldest son Dennis. By this point, he was 15 years old. This sick monster began to exploit his son's desperation for love and attention from his father, to mould him into the person who would take over the cult when he died. Dennis was assigned special rank and responsibilities within the compound, including overseeing the site when his father was away. Ryan would praise his son if he followed his orders, making him feel wanted for the first time in his life. Michael Ryan was clearly a misogynist. He saw women as mere objects to be used and abused. They were expected to keep the men fed and watered in the compound and look after the children. Ryan did not give them military ranks, but did coronate them with ridiculous titles, such as, quote, Queen of Israel. With him giving these titles, it would appear, solely to ensure that these women would continue to submit to his sexual demands. However, beginning in December 1984, just 5 months after the compound was established, members began falling out of favour with Ryan, including questioning his supremacy and teachings. And it was at this point that the horror of the farm in Rouleau would begin, and the true evil of Michael Ryan would be exposed. The next 2 sections come with a warning, so I'm going to discuss extreme acts of violence, including acts of rape, bestiality and incest involving a child. Please, if this will offend you, click off video now or skip forward to the section marked Downfall. Despite Rick Stice having opened up his home to the cult, he quickly began to fall out of favour with Michael Ryan. In December 1984, he lost his farm, and money that the cult had acquired had to be used to purchase the property. After this point, Michael Ryan began to claim that Rick had raped one of the female cult members, but was also having, quote, bad thoughts. He was also demoted in rank and moved into a trailer as punishment. In order to further punish Rick, Ryan began to abuse his son Luke, who was just 5 years old. Ryan would stub out cigarettes on Luke's body and draw the number 666 on his forehead, while saying that he was a child of Satan. In order to perform penance, Rick was ordered to beat Luke, and this he did whilst Ryan stood and watched. In January and February 1985, Luke himself and James Tim apparently made a cardinal sin in Michael Ryan's eyes. At a Bible study group, both of them questioned whether Yahweh actually existed, and by virtue of this, whether Ryan was actually a prophet. As punishment, James was chained to a porch. Due to the actions of his son, Rick Stice was further demoted to the rank of, quote, slave, and Luke was called a, quote, dog, mongrel, gook, or dog shit. At one point, Rick Stice fled the farm, but soon returned due to fearing, quote, eternal damnation. As an initial punishment, he, like James Tim, was chained up like an animal, and this is nothing compared to what happened next. So, in Michael Ryan's eyes, he had 3 challenges to his authority who needed to be dealt with: Rick Stice, Luke Stice, and James Tim. He therefore devised sickening acts of abuse to punish them for their dissent, but also to reinforce to all the other members the consequences of questioning his ultimate control over them. Michael Ryan threatened to amputate Rick's penis and to skin and burn his son Luke alive. In March 1985, James Tim was instructed to have anal sex with Rick Stice and was specifically told, quote, make him hurt. Rick was also fuck's sake, really. Rick was also forced to perform oral sex on Luke, who, as a reminder, was just 5 years old, and he was forced to do the same in return. These acts all occurred whilst the male members of the group stood on and watched, with Ryan overseeing and directing the abuse, stating that it was Yahweh's will that this was happening. In between these group punishments, the 3 would be abused individually, and on around March the 25th, 1985, whilst Ryan was beating Luke, he hit him with so much force that his head was slammed into the side of a cabinet. He was knocked unconscious and was simply left on the floor. In the morning, he was found to have died due to the severity of the head trauma he suffered, which caused significant internal bleeding. His neck had also been broken. James Tim and Rick Stice were then forced to dig a grave on the property, and Luke's body was then dumped like rubbish into the hole. After Luke's death, the abuse of Rick Stice and James Tim continued. Both men were regularly chained up and beaten by other group members. Rick was also forced to have sex with a goat on 3 separate occasions. On April the 4th, 1985, Rick Stice went into town to cash his social security check with one other group member. He was able to slip away and escape and went into hiding. It should be noted that Rick Stice left 2 of his children back at the compound. It doesn't appear from my research that he made any effort to contact the authorities to try to get them out of an environment that was clearly incredibly dangerous. With him gone, this left James Tim all on his own. Michael Ryan was no doubt enraged. Despite his acts of punishment, a follower had escaped. He needed to escalate the severity of his punishment to demonstrate his ultimate control. As a result of this, James Tim would suffer a horrifying death. The end for James Tim started on April the 27th, 1985, when Michael Ryan declared to the group that James had poisoned a turkey that they were about to eat. James was beaten and taken to a barn where he was chained up for the night. On April the 28th, Ryan told the men in the group that Yahweh had told him that James needed to be tortured, and so he, Jimmy and Timothy Haverkamp, Dennis Ryan, and John Andreas went into the barn to carry out God's will. James was told to undress and bend over a crate. Ryan informed him that Yahweh had told him that he needed to be, quote, probed. Michael Ryan then inserted a shovel handle about 5 or 6 inches into James Tim's rectum for around 30 seconds. When James began fidgeting, his hands were tied with baling wire. Michael Ryan then informed the others that Yahweh had told him the shovel handle needed to be inserted between 8 to 10 inches into James's rectum. This measurement was marked on the handle. Ryan then inserted the handle and told James whilst he was doing this, quote, "I ought to shove this thing up to your heart." Pathologists would later determine that the handle was actually forced approximately 2 to 3 feet into James's rectum with such force that it caused damage to his liver. Ryan then directed each of the others to probe Ryan in this way with the shovel handle, which they all did. Due to his screams, James's mouth was taped. It was decided the shovel handle was not punishment enough, and so a pickaxe handle was then used, and James was again anally raped with this object by all of the men. By this point, his anal wall had ruptured, and he would have been in horrific pain. The perpetrator then broke for lunch, with Michael Ryan telling the men and his teenage son that Yahweh had told him that James had not been punished enough, but then returned to the barn where James was tied, with his hands above his head, and he was whipped 15 times by each man. Heartbreakingly, and showing the level of indoctrination of this group, during the torture, James Tim never once denounced Michael Ryan. Instead, he screamed for God to forgive him and to save him. In response, Ryan said, quote, "Yahweh's given up on you. You don't have any hope anymore." After the whipping, James was untied, given a sleeping bag, and chained up. This would be his final night on earth. At breakfast the next morning, April the 29th, 1985, Michael Ryan again told the men involved that Yahweh was still displeased with James and that he needed to be punished more. The men returned to the barn and again began administering lashes from a leather whip. After 75 lashes to his back, James was secured to the floor on his back and whipped to the front of his body. James's left hand was then bound, palm up, on a block of wood, and Michael Ryan then used a revolver to shoot the tip off one of his fingers. Michael Ryan then directed the others to do the same, which they did. All of the fingertips and the thumb were shot off James's left hand. At lunch, Michael Ryan declared that Yahweh had told him that James Tim needed to die that afternoon. The men returned to the barn one final time. Ryan again led the abuse. He kicked one of James's arms, breaking it. He then put on a pair of yellow kitchen gloves and, using a razor blade, made incisions on James's leg before then pulling these strips off with a pair of pliers, essentially skinning him. Ryan then directed his son Dennis to break James's other leg. He did this by taking a piece of 2x4 and hitting him repeatedly until the bone in James's leg snapped. All the men then took turns hitting James with pieces of wood, shattering and splintering his bones. James was drifting in and out of consciousness, and, with glee, Michael Ryan bent down and asked him whether he thought that Yahweh meant business. Ryan then said to the others, quote, "I'll cave his chest in. That's sure to kill him." He then proceeded to stamp on James's chest with all of his might, whilst wearing cowboy boots. Sometime during this final assault, James Tim died. For good measure, Michael Ryan directed Timothy Haverkamp to fire a bullet into James's head, which he did. He then directed the other men to dig a grave, which, according to Yahweh, needed to be, quote, 6 foot long by 3 foot wide and 6 foot deep. James's naked and mutilated body was then dumped in the hole and covered with dirt. On June the 25th, 1985, John Andreas and Jimmy Haverkamp had gone out on one of their stealing raids and were transporting a spray rig back to the compound in Rouleau when they were stopped and arrested by the police. Whilst in jail, both men notified the police that they had a tale of horror to tell, and they gave full details about the horror of the farm in Rouleau, including the murders of Luke Stice and James Tim. Why they decided to confess is not clear. Because of the secretive nature of the cult, the police likely didn't have any idea these crimes had occurred. Potentially both men had some level of remorse for what they'd done. Regardless of the reason for their confession, on August the 17th, 1985, a huge task force descended on the property. This comprised of FBI agents, agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, Nebraska State Patrol officers, and officers from the Richard County Sheriff's Department. In addition, they were accompanied by both Jimmy Haverkamp and John Andreas, who over the next 2 days directed the authorities around the 80-acre property, showing them where both Luke and James had been murdered and buried so their bodies could be recovered. This short clip shows a video shot at the scene, which shows the building and room where James Tim was murdered, with Jimmy Haverkamp giving a brief explanation for what happened to James and why. What happened when you first stood one night rotting back here in this room, but up hit the work all the within. Defkin tied to this. With do you think what reason you were supposed to do that? Because the anger guy. Michael Ryan, Timothy Haverkamp, and Dennis Ryan were subsequently arrested and joined John Andreas and Jimmy Haverkamp in prison, whilst the full horror of the Rouleau cult was investigated. Michael Ryan was charged with the first-degree murders of both Luke Stice and James Tim, whilst the other 4 defendants were charged with the first-degree murder only of James. They were all remanded into prison to await their day in court. Legal proceedings against all the men began in early 1986. At court, Timothy Haverkamp pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of James Tim, i.e. there was an intention to kill, but it was not premeditated, him telling the court that he believed that God had directed James's death, based on what he'd been told by Michael Ryan. John Andreas and Jimmy Haverkamp also pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of James. Dennis Ryan pleaded not guilty and went to trial, but was found guilty of the second-degree murder of James Tim. John Andreas and both of the Haverkamps appeared as witnesses for the state at Michael Ryan's trial for the first-degree premeditated murder of James Tim. He was remorseless to the last. He attempted to throw everyone else, including his 16-year-old son, under the bus in order to save his own skin. At the trial, the full horror of the injuries suffered by James Tim was entered into evidence. 2 autopsies had been conducted on his body, and they showed a horrifying catalogue of abuse. James's anus was dilated due to him having been repeatedly anally raped with various objects. His rectal wall was found to have been perforated, and damage being caused to his internal organs due to these objects being forced several feet into his body. James's left hand was missing the thumb and the fingertips from all of his fingers due to being shot off. The left arm was broken, the bones in both legs were shattered, and James had multiple rib fractures. He had multiple bruises from repeated beatings, and his body was covered in marks from being whipped approximately 150 to 200 times. A large section of skin from one of his legs being cut and then forcibly pulled away from the muscle beneath. James was found with both his wrists and ankles bound with wire. A bullet wound was found in James's skull, but this was found to have occurred after he passed away. There were also suspicions that James's penis had been cut off, but it was not clear whether it being found disconnected from his body was as a result of a deliberate act or as a result of decomposition. James Tim suffered 3 days of unimaginable torture. He must have died in absolute agony. Michael Ryan was found guilty of the first-degree murder of James Tim and subsequently entered a no-contest plea to the second-degree murder of Luke Stice, i.e. he was acknowledging that the state had enough evidence to convict him of his crime without admitting his guilt. In late 1986, all of them were sentenced. Timothy Haverkamp was sentenced to between 10 years to life in prison for his role in the murder of James. He served 23 years in prison before being paroled in 2009. In 2014, due to his progress in the community, he was released from state supervision, which should have continued for the rest of his life. Jimmy Haverkamp was sentenced to between 1 and 26 years in prison for his role. He was paroled in 1998 after serving 13 years. John Andreas was also sentenced between 1 and 26 years in prison. He too served 13 years in prison before being paroled. Dennis Ryan was sentenced to life imprisonment for his participation in the murder of James Tim. In 1997, his conviction was overturned, and he was instead found guilty of manslaughter, i.e. he intended to cause serious injury, but not to kill. He was released in 1997 after having served 11 years. Michael Ryan was deemed to be an instigator and the driving force behind the murder of James Tim, which was a crime of, quote, exceptional depravity due to the unnecessary suffering caused through days of torture before his ultimate death. For this reason, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection and was sent to death row to await his date with the executioner. The second-degree murder of Luke Stice, Ryan was given a concurrent life sentence. It appears that all of those involved, except Michael Ryan, showed some level of remorse for their actions after their incarceration, and by and large, they accepted their punishments. It appears that when they were removed from the influence of Michael Ryan, the enormity of their crimes dawned on them, and the lies they built their lives on crumbled from beneath them. I found a very short clip of Dennis Ryan talking about his crimes. This clip is undated, but appears to be within the last 10 years. It's only short, but I want you to see it.
I can't take it back. Can't ever change it. I got it. You got to live with it every day. If I would have had a different dad, maybe things would have been different. He went off the deep end. And he took me with him.
I do believe there's genuine remorse in this man's demeanour and voice. I'll speak more about Dennis Ryan in a bit, but it's clear that his life has been destroyed by the influence of his father. I'll leave it up to you
To decide whether statements of remorse, after being involved in crimes as horrific as these, carry much weight, even taking into account the psychological manipulation that they were subjected to as part of the Rouleau Farm cult. However, Michael Ryan was unapologetic until the end. After his conviction, he declared that he was still in contact with God and was going to spend his time rewriting the Bible to reflect his twisted doctrine. In between doing this, he filed several voluminous appeals trying to get his conviction and sentence overturned. These appeals cited ridiculous claims, which were obviously lies, including claiming that jurors were falling asleep during the trial or reading newspapers openly in court whilst evidence was being presented. Michael Ryan also cited judicial misconduct against anyone and everyone involved in his case and claimed that his constitutional rights had been violated. Again, isn't it funny how people like this, who believe themselves above the law and care nothing for the rights of others, suddenly wheel out the Constitution when it suits them? All of his appeals were rejected. However, Michael Ryan would never be executed. In around 2012, he was diagnosed with salivary gland cancer, and by early 2015, this was terminal. When he heard the news of his father's impending death, Dennis stated, quote, "So he's finally going to die. Best for everyone. Good riddance. Flush him down the toilet for all I care." Michael Wayne Ryan died of cancer on May the 24th, 2015, removing one less evil from the world. His body was cremated, but I have no information about where his ashes were scattered. Hopefully, they were flushed down the toilet. There were so many layers to unpack in this case. As a headline, it's apparent that Michael Wayne Ryan was an extremely dangerous individual, a man whose life was driven by the need to dominate, control others in order to abuse and exploit them for his own sick gratification. He had no remorse, empathy or concern for anyone else but himself. Going deeper, I think that Ryan saw the world very differently to many of us. He saw people in terms of a hierarchy, depending on what trait he used to define them. So, with regards to race, he considered those who were white to be superior to people from any other race. With regards to gender, women were inferior to men. In terms of religion, Christianity, or at least a distorted view of this religion, was superior to any other belief system, with Judaism being right at the bottom. However, due to his narcissism, in each of these hierarchies he sat at the top. So for example, he was white, so therefore superior to other races generally, but amongst his Caucasian compatriots, they were inferior to him. Due to his twisted feelings of superiority, Ryan had developed a sense of entitlement, whereby he believed he should be allowed to act in any manner he wanted and exploit anyone he felt he could gain something from. The rules didn't apply to him, and anyone who dared question him needed to be punished and shown how superior he was. Due to him having clear traits of psychopathy, he was able to do this without remorse, without guilt. I think he was a man who wanted to control people, and his joining the military was based on this. He was not interested in serving his country. I think all he wanted to do was become an officer and had the power to order people around. I think, given his history, he wouldn't have lasted long in the military. He probably would have dropped out when he realised he actually had to work for this. So in the absence of this, he was a domineering monster who mercilessly abused his wife and children. They were to be controlled and forced to follow his rules, whilst he did whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. He repeatedly raped his wife, and I think this is a horrific but important aspect of this case for what happens later. It's described that she would cry and scream during these incidents. I think this is an indicator of his sexual sadism, with Ryan getting off on seeing the pain that he caused his wife through this violation. As with other narcissists, nothing was ever his fault, and I have little doubt that before he'd even met James Wickstrom, Michael Ryan was already an ardent racist and anti-Semite. He needed someone to blame for everything that was wrong in his life, and had likely selected specific types of people whose fault it was that he was a lazy, dishonest waster. His interaction with Wickstrom, I believe, turned a terrible situation into a nightmare by adding various elements which Ryan would use to full effect to commit his crimes. Firstly, I think that seeing the power that Wickstrom had over his congregation showed what a narcissist could really achieve: complete dominance over every aspect of people's lives, directing how they thought, how they acted, with them worshipping him like a god. It gave Ryan something to aspire to, a challenge. Secondly, no doubt he used these sermons as teaching exercises, a way to hone his skills to exploit and manipulate others into doing whatever he wanted, with him being taught the arm test, something that was easy to rig in order to get the outcome he desired. Thirdly, it brought him into contact with a huge number of potential victims, vulnerable and desperate people who just wanted answers, prime targets who he knew he could easily exploit. It's important here to pose the question of whether Michael Ryan believed the nonsense that he later told his cult members. I think the answer is complicated. It's both yes and no. Do I believe that Ryan actually believed he heard the voice of God, like someone whispering in his ear? No, I do not. I think this is what he told the group to make his claims seem more credible. There's no indicator from the information I've read that he was ever diagnosed with any delusional disorder. However, it does appear that Ryan did believe the Christian identity theology, that white people were essentially the master race, and all other races would be violently eradicated, and that this was gleaned from a reinterpretation of the Bible. This fed into Ryan's already present white supremacist beliefs. He supports to have spent a significant amount of time rewriting Bible verses to fit his twisted worldview, and whilst we'll never know what he wrote, I've no doubt that he created a narrative whereby he projected his own sickness onto these words and convinced himself that God wanted his followers to torture and murder others. So whilst he may not have had God whispering in his ear, Ryan likely believed that his love of violence, death and destruction was something that the Almighty would approve of, so he was free to say, yeah, Yahweh wants that, or Yahweh wants this, to get what he himself wanted to achieve, to wield ultimate control over other human beings. I mentioned the issue of sexual sadism earlier, as I think it's an important part of Michael Ryan's offending. Specifically, it's clear that his abuse of Rick Stice, Luke Stice, and James Tim was heavily sexually motivated, including forcing incest between a man and his son, directing acts of bestiality, forcing men to rape each other, and aimlessly raping a man with objects. These acts, which were watched by other group members, were clearly a way to demonstrate to the group the consequence of defying him. But I think the nature of these punishments was not arbitrary, and tells us a lot about Michael Ryan. Specifically, I believe that Ryan gained a great deal of sexual gratification from watching these acts, getting aroused from the degradation, humiliation, and pain his victims were forced to endure. The fact these acts occurred on males suggests to me that Ryan potentially had a paedophilic interest in little boys, but also had some level of sexual attraction to adult men. In amongst all of the horrors of this case, there's one aspect that for some reason bothers me more than anything, and that is Michael Ryan's manipulation and exploitation of his own son. I think this hits a sore spot for me, as children are the greatest gift that a person can ever have. It's also the greatest responsibility in life, as the parents essentially have complete control over that child, who looks to them for everything. A parent could very easily abuse that trust, and whilst 99% of parents only want the best for their children, and they would die rather than watch them come to harm, there are the 1% who revel in this power and use it to their own ends. This includes those monsters who, for example, sexually abuse their own children, essentially destroying their lives or those who killed them, robbing them of any future at all. Michael Ryan fits into this category. He spent years abusing Dennis and was likely fully aware that all he wanted was his love and attention. He exploited this to such a disturbing degree that he convinced his 15-year-old son that the way to please him was to commit acts of horrific violence, something he has to live with for the rest of his life. And then, when he was caught, he tried to throw this same child under the bus, betraying him utterly. I've no doubt there will be aspects of this case which resonate with people on different levels for different reasons, but the callousness shown towards his son and the deliberate destruction of his life in order to get what he wanted is to me absolutely abhorrent. I'm not going to mince my words here. I'm very glad that both Michael Ryan and James Wickstrom are dead. It's already enough division in society, and these fear-mongering pieces of shit added nothing positive to this world. The scary thing is that when pieces of shit like this die, there always seems to be another 5 who spring up to take their place, so the cycle of hatred just goes on and on. Amanda Everwood, with her chestnut hair and piercing blue eyes, was the epitome of elegance and creativity. Born into a family of artists, her childhood home was filled with the scent of oil paints and the sight of canvases in various stages of completion. Amanda had inherited her mother's talent and her father's determination, quickly making a name for herself as an exceptional landscape artist. Her works were known for their vibrant colors and the way they captured the soul of nature. Richard Everwood, in contrast, came from a lineage of lawyers. The Everwood family was renowned for their legal prowess, with generations serving as judges, attorneys, and legal scholars. Richard was no different. He excelled in law school, graduating top of his class, and quickly climbed the ranks at one of the most prestigious law firms in Belleville. His charm, good looks, and sharp mind made him a formidable attorney and a desirable husband. Amanda and Richard met during their sophomore year of college. It was a classic case of opposites. Attracting Amanda's free-spirited nature complemented Richard's structured and disciplined approach to life. They fell in love quickly, their relationship blossoming amidst late-night study sessions, gallery openings, and summer road trips. After graduating, they married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of Belleville. They settled into a beautiful Victorian home that Amanda adored. She transformed it into a haven filled with art, music, and love. The house had a large garden where Amanda often painted, drawing inspiration from the vibrant flowers and the changing seasons. Richard, on the other hand, was dedicated to his work, often spending long hours at the office. They had a son, Ethan, who became the center of Amanda's world. Their life seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Amanda's days were filled with painting, volunteering at the local art center, and taking care of Ethan. Richard's career continued to flourish, and he was soon made partner at his firm. They attended glamorous parties and charity events, where they were often the center of attention. However, as the years went by, Amanda noticed subtle changes in Richard. He became more distant, often coming home late and leaving early in the morning. The once warm and affectionate man she married was now cold and preoccupied. Amanda tried to ignore these changes, attributing them to the stress of his demanding job. However, the gnawing suspicion in the back of her mind grew stronger with each passing day. Carla Monroe entered their lives when Richard hired her as his personal secretary. Carla was stunning, with her dark, cascading hair, sharp features, and an aura of confidence that turned heads wherever she went. She was efficient, intelligent, and seemed to understand Richard in a way that Amanda no longer could. It wasn't long before Amanda's suspicions turned towards Carla. One evening, Amanda decided to confront Richard. She prepared a candlelit dinner, hoping to reignite the spark in their relationship and to get him to open up. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, Amanda poured her heart out, expressing her concerns and fears. Richard listened, but dismissed her worries, attributing his behavior to the pressures of his job. He assured her that there was nothing to worry about, but Amanda wasn't convinced. Determined to uncover the truth, Amanda hired a private investigator named Mark Collins. Mark was a seasoned professional with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Over the next few weeks, he followed Richard and Carla, documenting their interactions. The evidence he gathered was damning. Late-night dinners, weekends away, and intimate encounters that left no room for doubt. Richard was having an affair with Carla. Amanda felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness. She couldn't understand how Richard could do this to their family. But amidst her turmoil, she also felt a strange sense of relief. At least now she knew the truth, and she could decide what to do next. Armed with the evidence, Amanda's initial devastation gave way to a steely resolve. She decided to confront Carla first, hoping to gather more information before dealing with Richard. Amanda arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a charity event that Richard's firm was sponsoring. Carla, unaware of Amanda's true intentions, agreed to meet at a chic downtown cafe. The cafe was a cozy, intimate space with soft lighting and plush seating. Amanda arrived early, choosing a secluded corner table where they could talk privately. Carla walked in a few minutes later, exuding confidence and poise. As she approached the table, Amanda felt a mixture of anger and curiosity. Carla greeted Amanda warmly and commented on how beautiful the cafe was. Amanda, hiding her true feelings, replied politely and steered the conversation towards Richard. She mentioned how Richard had been spending a lot of time at the office and asked how he was handling the workload. Carla responded that Richard was incredibly dedicated and that the cases he was working on required a lot of his time and attention. Amanda then leaned in and, in a low voice, told Carla that she knew about the affair. Carla's face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Amanda stopped her, saying she wasn't there to accuse or blame her. Amanda just wanted to understand why it happened. Carla, with tears in her eyes, explained that it started a few years ago when Richard was going through a rough patch at work. They began spending more time together, and one thing led to another. As Carla spoke, Amanda felt a strange sense of empathy. She could see the pain in Carla's eyes, a reflection of her own turmoil. By the end of the conversation, they had formed an unexpected connection. Amanda was captivated by Carla's intelligence and charisma, while Carla found solace in Amanda's understanding and compassion. In the weeks that followed, Amanda and Carla continued to meet in secret. What had started as a confrontation evolved into a complex relationship. Their meetings became more frequent, and their bond deepened. One evening, Carla invited Amanda to her apartment, ostensibly to review some documents related to the charity event. The apartment was a stylish modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. As they sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking, the tension between them grew palpable. Carla set her glass down and looked into Amanda's eyes, saying that she had developed feelings for her. Amanda's heart raced. She had felt the same way, but had been too afraid to admit it. She confessed that she felt the same way. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, and that night, they crossed the line from emotional connection to physical intimacy. The affair was intense, a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Amanda felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, but she was also plagued by guilt and fear. They would meet in secluded spots around the city, hidden corners of parks, out-of-the-way cafes, and Carla's apartment, where they felt free from the prying eyes of the world. Their conversations ranged from deep, philosophical discussions to light-hearted banter. They shared their hopes, dreams, and fears, forming a bond that went beyond physical attraction. However, Amanda was acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. She knew that if Richard found out, the consequences would be dire. Despite this, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. Carla had become an essential part of her life, filling a void that she hadn't realized existed. Richard's suspicions grew as he noticed Amanda's changed behavior. She was more distant, often lost in thought, and seemed to have a newfound sense of confidence. Richard's paranoia led him to install a hidden camera in Carla's apartment, suspecting that Amanda might have discovered his affair and was plotting against him. When Richard reviewed the footage and saw his wife with Carla, his rage and sense of betrayal reached a boiling point. He felt emasculated and humiliated, convinced that both women had conspired against him. Richard began to meticulously plan his revenge, determined to regain control over his life. One stormy night, Richard invited Amanda to his office under the pretense of wanting to discuss their relationship and find a way forward. Amanda, hopeful for reconciliation, agreed. As she entered Richard's dimly lit office, she was struck by the coldness in his eyes. Richard told Amanda to sit down, his voice devoid of emotion. Amanda took a seat, her heart pounding. She started to speak, But Richard cut her off, slamming a folder of photographs on the desk. He said he knew everything and knew about her and Carla. Amanda's eyes widened in shock as she looked at the incriminating photos. She pleaded with Richard to let her explain, but he was beyond reason. He lunged at Amanda, his hands closing around her throat. Amanda struggled, clawing at his hands, but Richard's grip was unrelenting. Her vision darkened, and within moments she was gone. Richard stood over Amanda's lifeless body, his mind a whirlwind of rage and confusion. He knew he had to act quickly to cover his tracks. He staged the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, ransacking the office and scattering papers everywhere. He then drove to Carla's apartment, his anger boiling over. Carla was startled to see Richard at her door. She asked what he was doing there, her voice trembling. Richard pushed past her, his eyes wild with fury. He accused her of ruining everything and seducing his wife, destroying his family. Carla backed away, fear gripping her heart, and begged Richard to listen to her and understand that it wasn't like that. But Richard was beyond listening. He lunged at Carla, but she managed to evade him, grabbing a heavy vase and smashing it over his head. Richard staggered, momentarily disoriented. Carla seized the opportunity and fled. Running into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, she ran through the rain-soaked streets, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She had to get as far away from Richard as possible. She knew that if he caught her, he would kill her. Carla reached the outskirts of town and found an old abandoned cabin. She slipped inside, her body trembling with adrenaline and terror. The next morning, Ethan Everwood found himself without a mother and soon without a father. Richard, attempting to cover his tracks, reported Amanda missing and fabricated an alibi for himself. However, the police quickly uncovered inconsistencies in his story. Amanda's body was discovered in Richard's office, and forensic evidence, along with Richard's erratic behavior, pointed to his guilt. He was arrested and later convicted of Amanda's murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Carla, meanwhile, had vanished without a trace. Her car was found abandoned at a rest stop, miles away from Belleville. There were rumors that she had fled the country, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. Some speculated she had started a new life under an assumed identity. Carla's disappearance puzzled many. Growing up in a household marked by religious fervor and violence, Carla had endured years of suppression and fear. Fleeing wasn't just an escape, it was a lifeline to freedom. She feared the repercussions of being discovered by her family, knowing all too well the horrors they could unleash upon her, driving her to vanish without a trace, leaving behind a life of oppression for one of uncertain liberty. Ethan, now orphaned, was taken in by Amanda's sister Lydia, who raised him with love and care. The Everwood home, once filled with laughter and love, stood silent, a stark reminder of the tragic events that had unfolded. Lydia did her best to create a stable environment for Ethan, but the shadow of his parents' tragedy loomed large over his childhood. She often wondered what kind of man Ethan would grow up to be, carrying the weight of such a dark legacy. Carla's escape was not without difficulty. She knew she had to leave Belleville and disappear completely. She had some cash saved up and used it to buy a bus ticket to the nearest big city. From there, she moved from place to place, using different names and taking on various odd jobs to survive. Her once confident and poised demeanor was replaced by constant anxiety and fear of being recognized. Carla found temporary solace in small towns, where she could blend into the background. She dyed her hair, changed her appearance, and avoided making close connections with anyone. Each time she felt someone might recognize her, she moved on. Her life became a series of temporary stays and fleeting moments of peace. She missed Amanda deeply, and often dreamed about their time together, the passion they shared and the plans they had made. In a small coastal town far from Belleville, Carla finally found a semblance of stability. She took on a job at a local diner, working long hours and keeping to herself. The town was quiet, and the people were friendly but respectful of her privacy. For the first time in months, Carla began to relax and let her guard down a little. She rented a small, modest apartment and tried to rebuild her life, though the fear of being discovered never entirely left her. Ethan, now a teenager, struggled with the burden of his family's dark history. He was a quiet, introspective boy, often lost in thought. Lydia did her best to provide a loving home, but Ethan couldn't escape the whispers and stares from those who knew about his parents. School was a challenge, with classmates either avoiding him or bullying him for his father's crime. Ethan found solace in books, and spent hours at the local library, immersing himself in stories far removed from his reality. Lydia encouraged Ethan to pursue his interests, hoping to provide him with a positive outlet. He developed a passion for writing, pouring his emotions and experiences into his stories. His teachers noticed his talent and encouraged him to pursue a career in literature. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found hope in the future he could create for himself. One day, while browsing through old family photo albums, Ethan came across a photograph of his parents during happier times. They looked so in love, so full of life. He wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Determined to understand, Ethan began to dig deeper into his family's history. He read old newspaper articles, interviewed people who had known his parents, and pieced together the story of their lives. Ethan's investigation led him to discover the affair between his father and Carla. He was shocked and saddened by the betrayal, but he also felt a strange connection to Carla. He wondered what had happened to her after that fateful night. His search for answers led him to contact Mark Collins, the private investigator Amanda had hired. Mark, now retired, was hesitant to reopen old wounds but was moved by Ethan's determination. Mark shared with Ethan the details of his investigation, the evidence he had gathered, and the events that had transpired. Ethan learned about the confrontation between his mother and Carla, their subsequent affair, and the night his mother was murdered. Ethan felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a deep need for closure. Determined to find Carla, Ethan followed the trail she had left behind. He visited the places she had stayed, talked to people who had encountered her, and slowly pieced together her journey. The trail eventually led him to the small coastal town where Carla was now living. Carla was working her usual shift at the diner when Ethan walked in. She didn't recognize him at first, but as he approached her, she saw a familiar sadness in his eyes. Ethan introduced himself, explaining that he was Amanda and Richard's son. Carla was stunned and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She invited Ethan to sit down, and they began to talk. Ethan told Carla about his life, his struggles, and his search for answers. Carla, in turn, shared her story, her escape, and her attempts to rebuild her life. They talked for hours, sharing their pain and their memories of Amanda. Carla revealed how deeply she had loved Amanda, and how the affair had been a source of both joy and torment. Ethan asked Carla about the night his mother was murdered. Carla recounted the events, her voice trembling with emotion. She told him how Richard had confronted her, his rage and violence, and her desperate escape. Ethan listened intently, feeling a mix of anger towards his father and compassion for Carla. Ethan decided to stay in the coastal town for a while, to get to know Carla better, and to find some closure for himself. They spent a lot of time together, talking about Amanda, sharing stories, and helping each other heal. Carla found comfort in Ethan's presence, and Ethan felt a sense of connection and understanding that he had never felt before. As time went on, Ethan and Carla's relationship grew stronger. They became a support system for each other, helping to heal the wounds of the past. Ethan continued to write, inspired by the stories Carla had shared and the strength he saw in her. Carla found a new sense of purpose, helping Ethan and finding a way to move forward with her life. Years passed, and Ethan published his first novel, a fictionalized account of his family's story. The book received critical acclaim, and Ethan was praised for his emotional depth and storytelling ability. He dedicated the book to his mother, Amanda, and to Carla, who had shown him the importance of understanding and forgiveness. Carla, meanwhile, continued to live in the coastal town, finding peace and stability. She stayed in touch with Ethan, visiting him often and watching him grow into a successful writer. She found solace in the fact that she had been able to help Ethan find closure and that they had both found a way to move forward. The Everwood murders became a notorious case in Belleville, a cautionary tale of deceit, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of hidden passions. Amanda's art gained a lot of fame, her landscapes now imbued with a haunting beauty that drew admirers from afar. Richard's name, once respected, became synonymous with tragedy and madness. Years later, the town still whispered about Carla Monroe, the enigmatic secretary who disappeared into the night. Her fate remained one of Belleville's greatest mysteries, a lingering shadow over the tragic tale of the Everwood family. Ethan grew up carrying the weight of his parents' legacy. determined to forge a different path and break free from the cycle of betrayal and violence. In the end, the story of the Everwood murders served as a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. It was a tale that would be told for generations, a dark chapter in the history of Belleville that would never be forgotten. Ethan continued to write, his works often exploring themes of love, betrayal, and redemption. His novels resonated with readers, many of whom were unaware of the true story behind his words. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found a way to turn his pain into art, creating something beautiful from the ashes of his family's tragedy. In the end, the Everwood murders were more than just a crime. They were a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The lives of those involved were forever changed, but they found a way to move forward, to find peace, and create something new from the ruins of their past. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year, David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds' double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The Carson family lived in a picturesque suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and an aura of tranquility. Richard Carson, a well-respected accountant and his wife, Sophia, a beloved elementary school teacher, seemed to embody the perfect American dream. They had 2 children, Anna and Tyler, who were the pride and joy of their parents. One crisp autumn morning, the facade of perfection shattered. Richard Carson returned home from a weekend fishing trip with his friends to find the house eerily silent. The usual warmth and cheer were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. He called out for Sophia but received no response. Anxiety gnawed at him as he climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The sight that greeted him was every husband's nightmare. Sophia lay motionless on the bed, her skin a pale hue that contrasted starkly with the dark, dried blood staining the sheets. Richard's heart pounded as he rushed to her side, desperately trying to shake her awake. It was futile. Sophia was gone. Richard's frantic call to 911 brought the police and paramedics rushing to the scene. They confirmed what Richard already knew. Sophia Carson was dead. The initial investigation began, with officers combing through the house for clues. Richard was in shock, barely able to process the questions thrown his way. Detective Sarah McMillan, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for her keen instincts, took charge of the case. She quickly established that there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Sophia knew her attacker. As the investigation progressed, Richard's alibi was scrutinized. His fishing buddies corroborated his story, placing him miles away at the time of Sophia's death. The community was in disbelief. The Carsons had always appeared to be the perfect couple, deeply in love and committed to their family. But as the days passed, whispers of Richard's suspected infidelity began to surface. Sophia's best friend Laura mentioned that Sophia had confided in her about her fears that Richard was cheating. This revelation cast a shadow of suspicion over Richard, despite his solid alibi. The media quickly picked up the story, painting a picture of a troubled marriage and a potential crime of passion. The pressure mounted on the police to solve the case, but with Richard's airtight alibi, they were at a loss. It was then that Sophia's sister, Megan, decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator, Jake Thompson, to dig deeper into Sophia's suspicions and uncover the truth behind her sister's death. Richard and Sophia Carson's love story began in high school. They were the quintessential sweethearts, inseparable and deeply in love. After graduation, they went to college together, got married, and started a family. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, filled with love, success, and 2 beautiful children. Richard's career as an accountant flourished, and Sophia found her calling as a teacher. They were well liked in their community, active in local events, and always seen together at neighborhood gatherings. But beneath the surface, Sophia harbored growing suspicions about her husband's fidelity. It started with small things: late nights at the office, unexplained phone calls, and Richard's increasing emotional distance. Sophia confided in her best friend Laura, sharing her fears and doubts. Laura advised her to confront Richard, but Sophia was hesitant. She didn't want to believe that the man she loved could betray her. As months turned into years, Sophia's suspicions deepened. She found herself checking Richard's phone when he wasn't looking, scrutinizing his behavior for any signs of infidelity. Her anxiety grew, casting a shadow over her once happy marriage. She often asked Laura if she was overreacting, but Laura could see the toll it was taking on her friend. One evening, Sophia found a lipstick stain on Richard's collar. It was the final straw. She confronted him, demanding the truth. Richard denied any wrongdoing, insisting that it was a misunderstanding. He claimed he was loyal and devoted, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Their arguments became more frequent and intense. Sophia felt trapped in a web of doubt and mistrust, while Richard grew increasingly frustrated with her accusations. In her darkest moments, Sophia wondered if she was losing her mind. She contemplated hiring a private investigator, but feared what she might discover. Instead, she continued to confide in Laura, who remained her steadfast support. Laura, concerned for her friend's well-being, suggested they document everything. Sophia began keeping a journal, recording every suspicious incident, every fight, and every moment of doubt. She hoped that if the truth ever came out, she would have the evidence to confront Richard once and for all. Sophia's sister, Megan, was also aware of the tensions in the Carson household. She had always been close to Sophia and noticed the changes in her demeanor. Megan urged Sophia to take action, but Sophia remained paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. As the months passed, Sophia's suspicions became an all-consuming obsession. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that her husband was leading a double life. It was this unrelenting doubt that ultimately led Megan to hire Jake Thompson, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for her sister. Detective Sarah McMillan's team worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Sophia Carson's death. They interviewed family, friends, and neighbors, trying to build a profile of Sophia's life and the possible motives for her murder. Richard's cooperation was noted, but his solid alibi kept him out of immediate suspicion. Megan, desperate for answers, turned to private investigator Jake Thompson. Jake was known for his tenacity and skill in uncovering hidden truths. With a career spanning over 2 decades, he had a reputation for solving the most challenging cases. When Megan approached him, he listened intently to her concerns about Richard's infidelity and Sophia's suspicions. Jake agreed to take the case, starting with a thorough review of Sophia's journal. The detailed entries painted a picture of a woman tormented by doubt and fear. Sophia's descriptions of Richard's behavior and her growing anxiety provided Jake with valuable insights into the possible cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. Jake's first step was to delve into Richard's background. He conducted surveillance, followed Richard to work, and monitored his interactions. Richard appeared to be a devoted father and professional, but Jake knew better than to take things at face value. Interviews with Sophia's friends and colleagues revealed a woman who was deeply loved and respected. They spoke of her kindness, dedication to her students, and the love she had for her family. But they also mentioned the changes they had seen in her over the past few years. Laura, Sophia's best friend, was a crucial source of information. She shared the details of Sophia's fears and the confrontations she had with Richard. Laura also mentioned a woman named Carla Mason, a former colleague of Richard's who had once been very close to him. Sophia had always been wary of Carla, suspecting her of having an affair with Richard. Jake's investigation led him to Carla Mason. He dug into her background, uncovering a series of troubling details. Carla had a history of unstable relationships and a reputation for being manipulative. She had left the company where she worked with Richard under mysterious circumstances, and Jake's instincts told him there was more to the story. As Jake pieced together the puzzle, he began to see a pattern. Carla's presence in Richard's life, Sophia's escalating suspicions, and the sudden violent end to Sophia's life were all connected. He knew he was onto something significant, but he needed concrete evidence to prove Carla's involvement. Jake intensified his surveillance on Carla, watching her every move. He interviewed her acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. It became clear that Carla harbored a deep resentment towards Sophia, viewing her as the obstacle to her happiness with Richard. With the pieces falling into place, Jake prepared to confront Carla, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for Sophia Carson. Jake Thompson was no stranger to the darker side of human nature. With years of experience as a private investigator, he had seen it all: infidelity, fraud, even murder. But the Carson case had a complexity that intrigued him. As he delved deeper, the tangled web of deceit and betrayal began to unravel. Richard Carson, on the surface, was a model husband and father, but Jake's investigation revealed another side to him. Richard had indeed been unfaithful, and his affair with Carla Mason was more than a fleeting indiscretion. Carla Mason was a striking woman in her early 30s, with a magnetic presence that drew people to her. She had met Richard when they both worked at the same accounting firm. Their affair began innocently enough, with shared lunches and late-night conversations, but it quickly escalated into a passionate and clandestine relationship. Jake's surveillance provided him with the evidence he needed. He captured photos of Richard and Carla meeting in secret, their intimate moments betraying the depth of their connection. But it wasn't just the affair that caught Jake's attention. It was Carla's behavior. She was possessive, obsessive, and clearly driven by a desire to replace Sophia in Richard's life. Jake's investigation into Carla's past revealed a troubled history. She had grown up in a dysfunctional family, with a mother who was emotionally distant and a series of abusive relationships. These experiences had left Carla with deep emotional scars and a desperate need for validation and love. When she met Richard, she saw him as her ticket to a better life, a chance to escape her past and find happiness. But Carla's obsession with Richard took a dark turn when she realized he would never leave Sophia. Despite Richard's promises and assurances, he remained with his wife, further fueling Carla's resentment. She began to see Sophia as the obstacle standing between her and the life she desired. Her jealousy grew, and with it, a dangerous resolve. Jake's breakthrough came when he discovered a series of emails between Carla and Richard. In them, Carla expressed her frustration and anger, accusing Richard of leading her on and demanding that he leave Sophia. Richard's responses were apologetic, but non-committal, indicating his reluctance to abandon his family. One email in particular stood out. It was sent a week before Sophia's death. Carla had written a long, emotional message, threatening to expose their affair if Richard didn't take action. She hinted at a plan to remove Sophia from the picture, a chilling foreshadowing of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Armed with this evidence, Jake intensified his efforts to link Carla directly to the crime. He interviewed her former colleagues and friends, uncovering a pattern of manipulative and unstable behavior. They described Carla as someone who would go to great lengths to get what she wanted, often using deceit and emotional manipulation to achieve her goals. One colleague in particular provided a crucial piece of information. He recalled a conversation with Carla where she had fantasized about a life with Richard, free from the constraints of his marriage. She had spoken with a chilling detachment about the possibility of Sophia disappearing, a comment that now took on a sinister significance. Jake knew he was close. He gathered all the evidence he had collected and prepared to confront Carla. He needed her to confess, to break under the weight of the truth. Carla Mason's affair with Richard Carson had started with innocent flirtation and grown into a full-blown obsession. She had fallen hard for Richard, seeing him as her escape from a life of loneliness and pain. But as their relationship deepened, so did her jealousy and desire to replace Sophia Carson. The affair began 3 years prior at an office holiday party. Richard, charming and attentive, had noticed Carla sitting alone and struck up a conversation. They found common ground in their love for their work and shared frustrations about their personal lives. Richard confided in Carla about his strained marriage, while Carla shared her dreams of finding true love. Their connection was instant and electric. Soon they were meeting for lunches, then dinners, and finally secret rendezvous at hotels. Richard was careful to keep their affair hidden, but Carla's feelings for him grew stronger with each passing day. She fantasized about a future where they could be together openly, free from the constraints of his marriage. Carla's fantasies, however, were marred by the reality of Sophia's existence. Every time Richard went home to his wife, Carla's resentment festered. She started to view Sophia as the obstacle to her happiness, the barrier standing between her and the life she wanted with Richard. Carla's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would call Richard at all hours, demanding to know where he was and who he was with. She became possessive, monitoring his social media and showing up unannounced at his office. Richard, initially flattered by her attention, began to feel trapped by her neediness. The breaking point came when Carla discovered that Richard had lied to her about spending a weekend with Sophia. Enraged, she confronted him, demanding that he choose between her and his wife. Richard, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to calm her down. He promised he would leave Sophia, but deep down he knew he couldn't follow through. As Carla's obsession grew, so did her hatred for Sophia. She started to stalk her, learning her routines and habits. Carla would drive by the Carson house late at night, watching from the shadows as Sophia went about her life. Her anger boiled over as she saw the life she wanted being lived by another woman. Carla's plan to remove Sophia took shape over several months. She began to fantasize about ways to eliminate her rival, her thoughts growing darker and more dangerous. The email she sent to Richard, threatening to expose their affair, was a desperate attempt to force his hand. But when he failed to act, Carla decided to take matters into her own hands. On the night of the murder, Carla waited until she knew Richard was away on his fishing trip. She had meticulously planned every detail, from disabling the security cameras to ensuring she left no trace of her presence. She broke into the Carson house using a spare key Richard had given her, moving silently through the darkened rooms. Sophia was asleep when Carla entered the bedroom. The sight of her rival, peaceful and unaware, fueled Carla's rage. She approached the bed, a knife clutched tightly in her hand. Sophia woke up just as Carla lunged, but it was too late. The attack was swift and brutal. driven by years of pent-up anger and resentment. After the deed was done, Carla stood over Sophia's lifeless body, a mixture of triumph and horror washing over her. She had done it. She had removed the obstacle to her happiness. But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of her actions set in. She quickly wiped down the surfaces she had touched, making sure to leave no evidence behind. Then she slipped out of the house and disappeared into the night. Carla believed she had committed the perfect crime. But Jake Thompson's investigation unraveled her carefully constructed alibi. His surveillance and interviews revealed the depth of her obsession and the lengths she had gone to in order to be with Richard. The evidence he gathered painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to get what she wanted. As Jake prepared to confront Carla, he knew that her fragile psyche would be her undoing. The weight of her guilt, combined with the mountain of evidence against her, would be too much for her to bear. It was only a matter of time before she broke under the pressure and confessed to her heinous crime. Jake Thompson meticulously gathered the evidence needed to build an airtight case against Carla Mason. He knew that to secure a conviction, every detail had to be scrutinized and every lead followed. His investigation had revealed Carla's obsessive behavior, her deep-seated resentment towards Sophia, and the lengths she went to in order to be with Richard. Now it was time to piece it all together. Jake's first task was to consolidate the surveillance footage and photographs he had taken of Carla and Richard. The images clearly showed their intimate relationship, disproving any claims that Carla might make about their affair being over. These visual proofs were crucial in establishing Carla's motive. Next, Jake focused on the emails between Carla and Richard. The threatening messages Carla had sent, demanding that Richard leave Sophia or face the consequences, were damning evidence of her intent. Jake printed out the emails, highlighting the passages where Carla hinted at drastic measures if she didn't get her way. Jake also gathered testimonies from Carla's former colleagues and acquaintances. One witness, a close friend of Carla's, reluctantly shared a conversation they had just days before Sophia's murder. Carla had expressed a disturbing desire for Sophia to disappear, even making offhand remarks about how easy it would be to make it happen. This testimony painted a clear picture of Carla's premeditation. The most crucial piece of evidence, however, came from the crime scene itself. Jake had worked closely with Detective Sarah McMillan, sharing his findings and collaborating on the investigation. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Carla's DNA on the knife used to kill Sophia, as well as on the bedroom door handle. Despite her efforts to clean up, Carla had made critical mistakes that tied her directly to the murder. Jake and Sarah also discovered a partial fingerprint on the windowsill where Carla had entered the house. While it wasn't a complete match, it added to the mounting evidence against her. Jake knew that these physical proofs, combined with the digital and testimonial evidence, created a compelling case. With everything in place, Jake turned his attention to Carla's acquaintances. He interviewed neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by desperation and jealousy. One neighbor recalled seeing Carla's car parked near the Carson house on several occasions, further corroborating her stalking behavior. The final piece of the puzzle came from a surprising source. Richard, racked with guilt and realizing the extent of Carla's obsession, agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. He provided additional emails and messages from Carla, as well as his own account of their relationship. Richard's testimony was crucial in establishing the timeline and confirming Carla's motives. Jake presented his findings to Detective McMillan, who was impressed by the thoroughness of the investigation. Together, they compiled a detailed report outlining Carla's motives, actions, and the overwhelming evidence against her. The case was ready to go to trial. Carla was arrested at her apartment, her shocked expression revealing her belief that she had gotten away with murder. As the police led her away in handcuffs, Jake felt a sense of satisfaction. He had uncovered the truth and ensured that justice would be served for Sophia Carson. The legal proceedings were swift. Carla's defense tried to argue that she had been framed, but the evidence was irrefutable. The emails, the forensic evidence, and the testimonies painted a clear picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to achieve her desires. In the end, Carla was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard's involvement, though not criminal, left a stain on his reputation and devastated his family. The Carson children, Anna and Tyler, faced a future without their mother and with a father whose actions had indirectly led to her death. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, those left behind struggled to find a sense of normalcy. The Carson family's once bright future was now overshadowed by loss and betrayal. Sophia's absence was a constant presence in their lives, a void that could never be filled. Megan, Sophia's sister, took on the role of guardian for Anna and Tyler. She moved into the Carson home, providing stability and support for the children. Megan's bond with her niece and nephew deepened as they navigated their shared grief. Together, they honored Sophia's memory, finding comfort in the love she had given them. Laura, Sophia's best friend, also played a crucial role in helping the family heal. She organized memorial events, celebrating Sophia's life and the impact she had on those around her. The community rallied together, offering support and love to the Carson children, ensuring they knew they were not alone. Richard, burdened by guilt and remorse, sought therapy to confront his actions and the consequences they had wrought. He knew he could never undo the pain he had caused, but he hoped to find a path to redemption. Richard's journey was one of self-reflection and accountability, a long and difficult process of coming to terms with his past. As the years passed, Anna and Tyler grew up, carrying with them the lessons of their mother's life and the strength of their Aunt Megan's love. They pursued their dreams, determined to honor Sophia's memory through their actions and achievements. The scars of their past remained, but they found ways to move forward, holding on to the positive memories of their family. The Carson case, with all its twists and tragedies, became a beacon of resilience for the community. It reminded them of the fragility of life and the strength that could be found in unity and support. John Anderson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. John's body was discovered by his wife, Lisa Anderson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. John lay motionless in the living room, with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden and unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective James Carter, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Brooksville, everyone had their secrets, and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of John's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into John's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. John Anderson was a man of many facets. At 45, he had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Anderson's Supplies, which had been a staple in Brooksville for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, John was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Brooksville society. Despite his public persona, those who knew John well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Lisa had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young, but over time the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional arguments. Friends described John as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. John's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. That evening, John had planned to spend a quiet night with Lisa, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Lisa reported that John had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, and toxicology results were pending. Detectives Miller and Carter knew that they had to dig deeper into John's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Lisa and those closest to John, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Lisa Anderson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Miller and Carter knew better than to take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with John and her potential role in his death. Lisa worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their 2 children, Jake and Emily, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Lisa was well liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to John had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of John's death, Lisa recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how John had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Lisa's reaction to John's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved John and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Lisa's statements. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with John, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Miller and Carter decided to explore further, focusing on Lisa's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigation soon led them to Mark Benson, Lisa's co-worker. Initial inquiries revealed that Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detective suspected that there was more to the story than Lisa had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over John's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Miller and Carter arrived at the Anderson residence the morning after John's body was discovered. The house, a modest 2-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Miller, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room where John's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. John lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that John had died of unknown causes, pending a full autopsy. Carter, Miller's partner, was outside speaking with the first responders. A burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, he had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. None of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Miller turned her attention to Lisa, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Lisa's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. John had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Miller noted the way Lisa's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Miller and Carter spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Andersons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. A few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Evans, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing John the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, the detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Lisa and expanding to friends, family, and co-workers. The preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction, but Miller and Carter were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that John had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether John's death was natural or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Miller and Carter continued to scrutinize Lisa's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Lisa's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine, but the detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to John's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Lisa and her coworker, Mark Benson. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Lisa's affair with Mark, exploring how it might connect to John's untimely demise. The discovery of Lisa's affair with Mark Benson was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Mark, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Lisa at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Miller and Carter decided to bring Lisa in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Lisa initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with John's death. Lisa explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. John had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Mark, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to John. Miller and Carter knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Lisa or Mark to John's death. They decided to bring Mark in for questioning. Mark was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Lisa. He claimed that he had no knowledge of John's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that they would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Lisa and Mark had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Brooksville and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in John's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Lisa's motive seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Mark without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Miller and Carter needed to establish a link between the affair and John's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Lisa or Mark. The detectives also started to scrutinize Mark's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Mark might have had his own motives for wanting John out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Lisa could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Miller and Carter were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Lisa or Mark to have orchestrated John's death. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. But the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Mark Benson presented himself as a confident and composed individual, but under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Mark was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Lisa a year prior. At 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Brooksville. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Mark maintained that his relationship with Lisa was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm John. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of John's death, providing an alibi that the detectives would need to verify. As Miller and Carter dug into Mark's background, they found several red flags. Mark had moved to Brooksville after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Mark was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Mark's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Lisa. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Mark wrote about his desperation to start anew and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate John. The detectives also uncovered that Mark had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Lisa as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Mark might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Lisa's newfound widowhood. To verify Mark's alibi, Miller and Carter visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Mark had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of John's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Mark, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Lisa. Miller and Carter pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Mark's composure started to fray, and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if John were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Lisa and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to John's death. Was Mark trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Lisa and Mark under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunities. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for John's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. As the investigation progressed, Miller and Carter encountered numerous twists and turns that complicated the case. New evidence surfaced, leading them down unexpected paths and challenging their initial assumptions. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. One such twist came when the toxicology report was finalized. The foreign substance found in John's system was identified as a rare, fast-acting poison. This poison was not something one could easily acquire, pointing to a premeditated act rather than an accidental overdose. The detectives now had concrete evidence that John's death was a murder, and they needed to find out who had access to such a substance. Their inquiries led them to a local pharmacy where the poison had been purchased. The pharmacist remembered selling the substance to a man matching Mark's description, but there was no solid proof linking Mark directly to the purchase. This added another layer of suspicion, but was not enough to make an arrest. While following up on the lead at the pharmacy, the detectives received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a secluded park shortly before John's death. This information suggested that Lisa might have been plotting something clandestine, possibly involving Mark. The detectives traced the call, but found that it originated from a disposable phone, making it impossible to identify the source. Simultaneously, a surprising piece of evidence emerged from John's business dealings. Financial records indicated that John had recently transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown account. Further investigation revealed that this account belonged to a private investigator named Alex Thompson. When questioned, Thompson disclosed that John had hired him to follow Lisa, suspecting her of infidelity. This revelation painted a picture of a man who was not only aware of his wife's affair, but also taking steps to gather evidence. The private investigator's report included photos and detailed logs of Lisa's meetings with Mark. These documents confirmed the affair, but also contained troubling information about Lisa's behavior. According to Thompson, Lisa had been acting erratically in recent weeks, frequently discussing her unhappiness and expressing anger towards John. In one recorded conversation, she mentioned feeling trapped and hinted at wanting to escape her marriage by any means necessary. This new evidence prompted Miller and Carter to reevaluate their approach. They decided to conduct a thorough search of the Anderson home, hoping to find something that might link Lisa or Mark directly to the murder. During the search, they discovered a hidden compartment in Lisa's closet, containing vials of the same rare poison found in John's system. This discovery was damning and suggested Lisa's direct involvement in the crime. Confronted with this evidence, Lisa's demeanor shifted. She became defensive and hostile, accusing the detectives of trying to frame her. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the poison and that someone must have planted it to incriminate her. However, just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Mark Benson came forward with new information, claiming that Lisa had manipulated him into helping her acquire the poison. He provided emails and messages in which Lisa discussed her plan to poison John, making it appear as though Mark was a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind. With conflicting stories from Lisa and Mark, Miller and Carter faced a complex challenge. They needed to determine who was telling the truth and who was orchestrating a cover-up. The investigation had revealed a tangled web of deceit, motives, and opportunities, but the exact sequence of events leading to John's death remained elusive. Conversely, Mark's narrative painted him as a pawn in Lisa's scheme. He described how Lisa had gradually introduced the idea of poisoning John, making it seem like a desperate measure to free herself from an unbearable situation. He admitted to helping her obtain the poison, but insisted that he had never intended for John to die. His portrayal of Lisa as the mastermind added another layer of complexity to the case. To uncover the truth, the detectives decided to conduct a final round of intense interrogations. They hoped to catch one or both suspects in a lie, or reveal inconsistencies that could break the case wide open. Miller and Carter knew that the key to solving the murder lay in understanding the true nature of the relationship between Lisa and Mark and the depth of their motives. In a tense interview, Lisa finally broke down. She admitted that she had felt trapped in her marriage and saw no way out other than eliminating John. However, she insisted that Mark had been an active participant, encouraging her to go through with the plan. Her confession provided crucial insight into her state of mind and her willingness to commit murder to achieve her goals. With this new information, the detectives turned their attention back to Mark. They confronted him with Lisa's confession, hoping to provoke a reaction. Mark, realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, began to unravel. He confessed to helping Lisa, but maintained that she had manipulated him from the start. The confessions from both suspects provided a clearer picture of the motives and events leading up to John's death. The detectives now had to piece together the final puzzle and determine how to proceed with arrests and charges, ensuring that justice would be served. The breakthrough in the case came when the detectives re-examined the timeline and physical evidence one last time. They discovered a crucial piece of evidence that had initially been overlooked: a security camera from a neighbor's house that captured a portion of the Andersons' backyard. The footage revealed Mark entering the Anderson home on the night of John's death, contradicting his alibi and providing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict for both Lisa and Mark. Lisa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Mark received a slightly lesser sentence due to his perceived secondary role in the crime. The community of Brooksville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, but there was a sense of closure as justice had been served. John Harrison, a respected local businessman, was found murdered in his own home. The evidence soon pointed towards his wife, Emily, sparking a scandal that would unravel a complex web of lies, twisted love triangles, deceit, and dark secrets. Emily Harrison, a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, had always been the center of attention. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended amicably, or so it seemed. John, her current husband, had a strained relationship with his younger brother, David. This strained dynamic hid deeper, more sinister connections that would come to light as the investigation unfolded. The murder of John Harrison was not a straightforward case. It was the catalyst that exposed a convoluted love triangle, revealing that everyone involved had motives buried beneath layers of pretense and propriety. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective Tom Reynolds, would soon find themselves entangled in a case that defied simple explanations. The night of the murder, Emily's scream pierced the quiet neighborhood. The first responders arrived at the Harrison residence to find Emily in a state of hysteria, her clothes stained with blood. John's body lay sprawled on the living room floor, a deep gash across his throat. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the carpet. The scene was chaotic, with furniture overturned and signs of a struggle evident. Officer Daniels, the first on the scene, quickly secured the area. He observed Emily, who was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a framed photo of her and John. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain what had happened. "I found him like this. I came home and he was just lying there. I didn't know what to do." Her voice was shaky, her eyes wide with terror, but there was something in her demeanor that didn't quite add up. She was too composed, too rehearsed. Detective Miller arrived shortly after, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She noted the absence of forced entry and the fact that John seemed to have been caught off guard. It suggested that he knew his attacker. Miller's gut instinct told her that this was more than just a burglary gone wrong. As the forensic team began their work, Miller pulled Emily aside for a more detailed statement. Emily recounted her day, carefully avoiding eye contact. She claimed to have been out shopping and returned to find John dead. But there were inconsistencies in her story, small details that didn't align. Detective Reynolds joined Miller, his expression grim. He had spoken with the neighbors, who reported hearing raised voices earlier in the evening. None could identify the second voice, but it was clear that John had not been alone before his death. Miller looked at Reynolds. "This isn't a simple case, Tom. There's more to this than meets the eye." Reynolds nodded in agreement. "Let's dig deeper. Something tells me we're only scratching the surface." The investigation into John Harrison's murder kicked off in earnest the following day. Detectives Miller and Reynolds began their meticulous process of gathering evidence and conducting interviews. The first step was to build a timeline of John's final hours. They discovered that John had left his office around 5 p.m., a bit earlier than usual. His assistant mentioned that he seemed preoccupied, almost distracted. Emily's account placed her at the local mall during this time, but there were no security camera records to confirm her presence. Detective Miller focused on Emily's behavior. She seemed cooperative, yet there was an underlying current of tension. During questioning, Emily maintained her story but frequently glanced at her phone as if expecting a message or call. Miller made a mental note to check her phone records. Meanwhile, Reynolds delved into John's professional life. As a successful real estate developer, John had made a few enemies. Business rivals and disgruntled former employees formed a list of potential suspects. However, none seemed to have a motive strong enough for murder. As they dug deeper, the detectives learned more about Emily's past. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended 5 years ago. The divorce was amicable on paper, but whispers of infidelity and financial disputes lingered. Michael had moved out of town but returned occasionally, supposedly to visit his daughter from another relationship. Detective Miller decided to pay Michael a visit. He lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Michael was a tall, brooding man with a rugged charm. He appeared genuinely shocked when Miller informed him of John's murder. "Emily called me last night," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "She was hysterical, said John was dead. I told her to call the police and then I rushed over. But by the time I got there, the place was crawling with cops." Michael's alibi was shaky, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Miller noted his reaction and decided to keep him under surveillance. Back at the station, Reynolds had uncovered a new lead. David Harrison, John's younger brother, had been seen arguing with John several days before the murder. David, a charming but aimless man, had always lived in his brother's shadow. He harbored a deep resentment towards John, fueled by jealousy and financial dependence. David was brought in for questioning. He was visibly nervous, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke. "John and I argued about money," he admitted. "He was going to cut me off, but I didn't kill him." The detectives were skeptical. David's alibi for the night of the murder was weak. He claimed to have been at a bar, but no one could confirm his presence. As they continued to press him, David's story began to unravel. Emily's suspicious behavior, Michael's shaky alibi, and David's deep-seated resentment formed a tangled web. The detectives realized they were dealing with more than just a crime of passion. There were layers of deceit and hidden motives that needed to be peeled back, one by one. John and Emily Harrison appeared to be the quintessential suburban couple. They had a beautiful home, a successful business, and were well liked in their community. But beneath the veneer of their perfect life, cracks were beginning to show. John had built his real estate empire from the ground up. He was known for his business acumen and ruthless negotiating tactics. However, his professional success came at a personal cost. John's demanding work schedule left little time for his marriage, creating a rift between him and Emily. Emily, on the other hand, had a more complex past. Raised in a wealthy family, she was accustomed to a life of privilege. Her first marriage to Michael Turner had been a whirlwind romance. Michael was a charismatic entrepreneur, but his business ventures often ended in failure. Their relationship was passionate but tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments and infidelity. The divorce had been bitter, with Emily accusing Michael of cheating and financial mismanagement. Michael, in turn, claimed that Emily's spending habits had driven him to the brink of bankruptcy. Despite the acrimony, they managed to part ways without too much public scandal. Michael left town, but he never completely severed ties with Emily. John entered Emily's life shortly after her divorce. He offered stability and security, something she desperately needed. Their courtship was swift, and they married within a year. However, the transition from a tumultuous relationship to a stable one was not easy for Emily. She missed the excitement and unpredictability that Michael had brought into her life. David Harrison, John's younger brother, was another significant figure in the unfolding drama. David had always been the black sheep of the family. He struggled with various addictions and had a string of failed business ventures. John often bailed him out, creating a sense of dependency and resentment. David's relationship with Emily was complex. They had an undeniable chemistry, and their interactions were often charged with unspoken tension. Emily confided in David about her marital problems, and he, in turn, found solace in her company. It was clear to the detectives that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. As Miller and Reynolds dug deeper, they discovered that John had recently made some significant financial moves. He had taken out a large life insurance policy and transferred substantial assets into Emily's name. These actions suggested that John was either planning for the future or anticipating something dire. Emily's spending habits had also come under scrutiny. Despite her outward appearance of concern and grief, her bank records revealed large withdrawals and unexplained expenses. The detectives began to suspect that she might have been planning to leave John and start a new life elsewhere. Michael Turner, though seemingly out of the picture, still harbored feelings for Emily. He had recently come back into town and had been seen meeting with her on several occasions. Their interactions were friendly on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of unresolved tension and unspoken words. The background checks painted a picture of a marriage on the brink, with each character hiding their true intentions behind a facade of normalcy. John was the pillar of the community, Emily the perfect wife, David the troubled brother, and Michael the ex-husband with lingering feelings. But as the detectives would soon discover, appearances could be deceiving. As the investigation progressed, the detectives focused on uncovering the motives behind John Harrison's murder. Each of the main players had reasons, both hidden and overt, that could drive them to such an extreme act. Emily's financial troubles were the most glaring. Despite John's success, their finances were strained. Emily's lavish lifestyle had put them in significant debt. The large life insurance policy John had recently taken out added a sinister layer to this financial stress. If Emily were to benefit from John's death, it would solve all her money problems. Emily's affair with David complicated matters further. Their relationship was more than just a fleeting romance. It was a deeply emotional bond, forged out of mutual dissatisfaction and dependency. Michael Turner also had a motive. His lingering feelings for Emily and the unresolved bitterness from their divorce created a volatile mix. Michael's financial instability made him susceptible to desperate measures. His frequent visits to Emily hinted at a rekindled relationship, which could have easily turned into a conspiracy against John. David's resentment towards his brother was well documented. He had lived in John's shadow for most of his life, relying on him for financial support. The argument they had days before the murder centered on money and control. John had threatened to cut David off, a move that would leave him destitute. David's dependence on John created a deep-seated hatred that could have driven him to murder. The detectives also considered the possibility of a joint effort between Emily and David. Their affair, coupled with their financial motives, made them prime suspects. If they conspired together, they could both benefit immensely from John's death. Emily would gain financial freedom, and David would rid himself of his brother's dominance. One evening, Detective Miller received a call from a local bartender who claimed to have seen Emily and David together on the night of the murder. According to the bartender, they appeared to be in an intense conversation, their body language suggesting more than just a casual encounter. This new information put both Emily and David at the scene of the crime around the estimated time of death. Miller and Reynolds brought Emily in for further questioning. Confronted with the bartender's testimony, Emily's composure began to crack. She admitted to meeting David, but insisted they were discussing her troubled marriage and had nothing to do with John's death. David, on the other hand, was less forthcoming. When questioned about his whereabouts, he became defensive and evasive. His alibi, which had already been weak, now seemed even more questionable. The detectives pressed him on his relationship with Emily and the nature of their conversation that night, but David stuck to his story of innocence. Michael Turner also remained a person of interest. His frequent visits to Emily, coupled with his financial troubles, made him a viable suspect. In the midst of these revelations, the detectives encountered several red herrings. One such distraction came in the form of an anonymous tip, suggesting that John was involved in illegal activities. The tip claimed that John had been laundering money through his real estate business. While this lead initially seemed promising, further investigation revealed it to be unfounded. It appeared to be a deliberate attempt to divert the detectives' attention from the true motives behind the murder. Another false lead came from a disgruntled former employee of John's. The employee had a history of making threats against John and had been fired under contentious circumstances. However, after a thorough investigation, it became clear that he had no involvement in the murder. His threats were merely empty words born out of frustration and resentment. The turning point came when Detective Reynolds discovered a series of text messages between Emily and Michael. The messages revealed a rekindling of their romantic relationship and discussed plans to meet secretly. One message in particular stood out. Sent on the day of the murder, it read, "We need to act tonight. John can't find out." Armed with this new evidence, Miller and Reynolds confronted Emily and Michael separately. Emily broke down under the pressure, partially confessing to the affair but denying any involvement in the murder. Michael, however, maintained his innocence, insisting that the messages were taken out of context. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Miller decided to take a closer look at the phone records and financial transactions. She believed that these would provide the concrete evidence needed to tie the suspects to the crime. The phone records revealed a flurry of calls and messages between Emily, David, and Michael in the days leading up to the murder. The communication pattern suggested a coordinated effort, with Emily at the center. On the night of the murder, there were several calls between Emily and David, as well as a brief call to Michael. This triangulation of communication placed all three suspects in contact during the critical hours. Miller also discovered an unusual transaction in Emily's bank account. Large sum of money had been transferred to an offshore account just days before John's death. This transaction, combined with the life insurance policy, suggested that Emily was preparing for a significant change in her financial situation. Armed with this new evidence, the detectives decided to confront Emily once more. This time, they presented her with the phone records and the financial transactions. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Emily's facade of innocence began to crumble. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't want it to come to this. I just wanted out. John was controlling, suffocating. I needed a way out, but I never wanted him dead." Miller pressed further. "Who did you talk to that night, Emily? Why were you and David in contact so frequently?" Emily hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "David and I, we had a plan. We were going to leave John, start fresh, but I swear we never planned to kill him." The detectives knew they needed to hear David's side of the story. When they brought him in for questioning, David initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with the phone records and Emily's partial confession, his resolve weakened. David admitted to meeting Emily on the night of the murder, but claimed that their plan was only to confront John, not to harm him. Emily had convinced him that John would never let her go, and that they needed to make him understand that their relationship was over. Michael's involvement became clearer as the detectives reviewed his financial records. They discovered that he had received a substantial sum of money from an unknown source shortly after John's death. This payment, coupled with the text messages, suggested that Michael was part of the conspiracy. The detectives decided to bring all three suspects in together. In a tense confrontation, they laid out the evidence. Emily's breakdown, David's nervousness, and Michael's defiance created a volatile atmosphere. Miller addressed them. "We know about the affair. We know about the money. It's time to come clean. Who killed John?" Emily, tears streaming down her face, finally confessed. "It was an accident. We confronted John, things got heated, and David lost control. He didn't mean to kill him." David's face paled as he stammered, "It was self-defense. John attacked me and I just reacted. I didn't mean for it to end this way." Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, added, "I was supposed to help them disappear after. I never thought it would go this far." The detectives had the pieces they needed. The confrontation had turned violent, leading to John's accidental death. Emily and David had panicked, and Michael had stepped in to help cover it up. The murder was a tragic result of a plan gone horribly wrong. With the confessions in hand, the detectives knew they had uncovered the truth. The case was far from simple, but the tangled motives and relationships had finally come to light. The truth was a web of love, betrayal, and desperation. The final confrontation with Emily, David, and Michael marked the culmination of weeks of intense investigation. Detectives Miller and Reynolds had pieced together the intricate puzzle of John Harrison's murder. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Emily, David, and Michael began. The community of Willow Creek, once known for its tranquility, was now a hub of media attention. Reporters and spectators alike were eager to hear the sordid details of the case that had shocked the town. The prosecution laid out a compelling narrative. They described how Emily's affair with David had rekindled old passions, and how their relationship had become a desperate escape from her controlling marriage. The prosecution argued that the financial troubles and the life insurance policy created a powerful motive for murder. Emily's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who made poor decisions in a moment of panic. They emphasized that the murder was unplanned and that Emily had no intention of killing her husband. David's defense focused on self-defense. They highlighted John's aggressive behavior and his attack on David, arguing that David had acted out of fear for his life. They portrayed him as a man pushed to his breaking point by years of familial tension and resentment. Michael's defense was the most straightforward. They claimed he had no prior knowledge of the murder plan and that his involvement was limited to helping Emily out of misguided loyalty. He was depicted as an unwitting accomplice, caught up in a situation beyond his control. Throughout the trial, the detectives' meticulous work came to light. The phone records, financial transactions, and confessions all painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to John's death. The jury listened intently as the prosecution and defense presented their cases. On the stand, Emily was a picture of remorse. She recounted the night of the murder in vivid detail, her voice breaking as she described the confrontation with John. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke of her regret and fear. "I loved John," she said, her voice trembling, "but I felt trapped. When David and I confronted him, everything spiraled out of control. I never wanted this to happen." David's testimony was equally emotional. He described the years of living in John's shadow, the constant feeling of inadequacy, and the moment of terror when John attacked him. "I just wanted to protect myself," he said, his voice cracking. "I never meant to kill him. It was an accident." Michael, in his testimony, admitted to helping Emily cover up the murder, but insisted he had no part in the actual killing. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I thought I was helping a friend, but I realize now how wrong I was." The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. They emphasized the premeditation involved in the affair and the financial motives. They argued that while the murder might not have been meticulously planned, it was the result of a series of deliberate actions taken by Emily and David. The defense's closing arguments focused on the emotional and psychological aspects of the case. They pleaded for leniency, highlighting the lack of premeditation and the complex web of emotions that led to the tragic event. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Emily and David were found guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging the crime's emotional context, but also the gravity of their actions. Michael was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact, his role in the cover-up undeniable, but his involvement in the murder itself less clear. As the verdicts were read, the courtroom was silent. Emily Harrison was sentenced to 20 years in prison. David Harrison received a 15-year sentence. Michael Turner, though less directly involved, was sentenced to 5 years for his role in the cover-up. The twisted love triangle that led to John Harrison's murder had unraveled, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The truth, once uncovered, had brought justice, but it had also revealed the depths of human frailty and the devastating consequences of unchecked desires. At the center of this tragic story were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Oliver Holbrook, a charismatic local businessman, Taylor Tanner, a devoted elementary school teacher, and Claire Reeves, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave two of them dead and the third forever changed. Oliver Holbrook was born and raised in Millbrook, the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From an early age, it was clear that Oliver was destined for success. His father, a prominent local attorney, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Oliver excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school football team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Oliver attended an Ivy League university where he studied business and economics. But there was another side to Oliver Holbrook, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Oliver viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Oliver was never satisfied. He craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Oliver began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Oliver entered into relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Holbrook, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Claire, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Oliver know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Taylor Tanner was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Millbrook, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved family doctor, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal shelter. Taylor's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Tanner household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter, and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Taylor into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. It was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider, having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York. Her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. As summer turned to fall in Millbrook, the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns, or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire, even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver. The two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women, with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior as he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity. His thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping. More than once, Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and icy accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then, it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plan seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower, struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Montague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now surely Oliver would be hers, but as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Montague's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks. She obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Montague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Montague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she didn't recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Claire. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire, Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces.